generally we don't do anything without guidelines, without a structure or a framework to work off. And that's a bit like saying we don't do anything unless we've been told how to do it. So if we're learning something or learning anything, the general way is that someone comes along and tells us how to do it. And then we can do it because we didn't know before, so they tell us. And then afterwards we remember what they told us. And so we follow those guidelines, we follow those rules. And then we might say that we've learned it. We no longer need to be taught. But if we do say that, what we're missing is that we've lost autonomy, because whenever we're running off guidelines, whenever we're running off, as we might say, our mental map of the world, when we're using that as our springboard to act, when we're acting off that, then that's not autonomous. We're being told what to do by rules, which is kind of like what it's like to be a robot. There's a whole bunch of rules tell us what to do. If you had a robot and it had no programming, what the hell is it going to do? So even though this sounds like a kind of perfectly respectable paradigm of how we learn to do stuff and then we go off on our own and do it, it isn't. It's all about loss of autonomy. Admittedly, this is hard to see because we don't see the ideas. We don't see the map of the world that we are utilizing, because it's all so automatic. So there's a kind of a thing which sometimes is called false spontaneity, which is when we act out our programming without being aware that there's programming there. And so we feel like we're being spontaneous, and it's like, and the implication of that is that it's all genuinely me that's expressing this opinion or whatever it is. It's genuinely me. I'm not copying someone else. This is my take on matters. So false spontaneity is also the same thing as false autonomy, a false sense of autonomy. And it's this false sense of autonomy that we all have, in as much as we are running off thought, or letting thought tell us what to do, or letting thought tell us what reality is, which is what we all do, and we don't know it. We're not consciously aware that every step of the way my thoughts are telling me what reality is. This is a this, that is a that, you're a this, you're a that. We're so used to it, so habituated to it, we're identified with the teller, the one who tells us stuff. So it feels like it's us who are knowing whatever it is, so we don't feel as if we're being puppeted or controlled, even though of course we are. And the only way to live in an autonomous way that isn't copying some template that thought has provided with us, or that society or whatever group we happen to be part of has provided us with, is to step away from the whole structure of thought, step away from the map, step away from the guidelines. Then we're autonomous. Whatever I do then, it really is an expression of my autonomy, because it's not coming from anywhere else. It's not coming from a thought or an idea that's been passed on from generation to generation, person to person, for ages and ages. There's a problem with this, though, or an apparent problem, because if I'm used to doing what thought tells me to do, or acting on a picture of the world that thought has provided me with. And that picture, or the guidelines that thought provides me with, is suddenly moved away, then that is what you could call the biggest existential challenge that there ever could be, or ever would be. There's no bigger challenge than that. Because I was addicted to thought, without knowing it. Thought was my master, but I didn't know it. So I get all kind of cocky in myself and say, I don't need to be told what to do. Off I go, and then I discover it's like being born. I've only just been born at that point, and it's overwhelming, totally overwhelming. Plus, like with any addiction, I miss the nice, cozy feeling that the addiction provided me with. So as addictions go, this is the big one. The addiction to thought, the addiction to being told what to do by our thoughts, which is a ridiculous state of affairs. Why would I want to be told what to do? Or perhaps a better way to put this would be to say, why would I want to be told what life is and to be told how to live that life? Now, obviously, I wouldn't want that. The whole idea is deeply absurd. But the point is that that is exactly how I am living my life. As long as I'm living rationally, living on the basis of my rational understanding. And we're all living rationally. This is a rational world we live in. Rationality is king. We're all living on the basis of our rational understanding. Every person you meet, every person you see coming down the street, they're acting on the basis of their rational understanding of the world. And so they're acting in a fashion that is heteronymous rather than autonomous. And we might say, well, what's the big deal anyway? Who gives a damn? Is it really that important? And the thing is, if we look a little bit more into what it means to be autonomous, what it means to be heteronymous, is that when we're living in a heteronymous fashion, we're not living because we're not there. A reproduction of us, a stand-in, is working, is living our lives for us. Just as long as I am being totally defined and controlled and determined by thought, I am not. Who I really am is not. All that there is thought, and it's puppet that has been produced. So we could say, well, what's the big deal? But what we are asking when we say that is, what is the big deal? What's wrong with going around the place, knocking about the shop, as thought's production of us, thought's simulation of us, thought's cockeyed idea of us, instead of who we really are, and then piggybacking that simulation, piggybacking that idea, so that we think that idea, that simulation, that production of thought actually is who we are. If we can see that clearly, we can see exactly what's wrong, or what's not so great about the state of heteronomy. As Colin Wilson says, what's happening is the inner robot is living my life for me. Well, why don't I get to live my own life? Don't I want to live my own life? Would I hand it over to be lived by a robot? Remembering that when a robot lives my life for me, that's a robotic life. It's a very, very dull. It's like a lawnmower mowing a lawn. It's like a potato peeler peeling a potato. It's just a mechanical task. And mechanical tasks are infinitely predictable, infinitely uninspiring, infinitely uncreative. It's just the same thing over and over again. And the only reason you do it is because there's some kind of output or outcome that's really, really helpful. So I peel potatoes so I can chop the potatoes up and make chips or something. And that's okay. It's okay to use tools and act mechanically. But if it's my whole life that I'm talking about, and my whole life is lived mechanically, and my whole life is a series of routines, a series of known steps that's been reproduced or copied out forever and ever and ever, which is completely and completely stale, as Krishnamurti keeps saying. In that case, if we can say that, we might have the imagination to see just how unpleasant such an idea is. It's an extraordinarily unpleasant revelation to have. So the state of heteronomy is really the state of possession. Unfashionable though this term might be in the present age, we are being possessed, exactly like Jung says, by an idea. Ideas possess us. We don't have ideas. The ideas have us. So in the case of possession, we do all sorts of stuff that we don't really want to do, and that isn't in any way harmonious with our true being. We just do this stuff which is completely not what we do, but we do it because we're possessed. We no longer have any autonomy. And if I am possessed in this way, possessed by thought, then it's no different from the more old-fashioned conception that we have of possession as being possessed by a demon. It feels exactly the same. If you were to wake up all of a sudden, you'd realize that someone else is living your life for you, and someone else was doing stuff that you would never want to do, stuff that you would feel quite possibly appalled by, and you're left to pick up the bill. Now, we don't have to worry about demons. We don't have to go into the demonology side of things. What's possessing us is essentially a machine, the inner robot, as your man says. That doesn't make it any better, though. Being possessed by a machine means that everything I do is mechanical nonsense. Everything I do is meaningless. The functioning of a machine is meaningless. Now, within the bigger context, I can use a machine to do a thing, and then that's fine, because I can say, okay, I need you to use that machine in order to, I don't know, maybe I'm using a cement mixer to mix cement because it's easier than just doing it with a shovel. So I can say, yeah, I needed the cement to build the wall or whatever it was, and that's fine, and that is fine. But to come back to the same point, if I am interfacing with the world in a machine-like way, if I'm being a machine my whole life, then what's the point of that? What's the benefit from that? What am I going to get from it? Apart from this horrible feeling of really realizing that I've been used by this what is essentially malign entity. It's malign because it cares nothing for what I really, really value. So what I really value is ignored because I have to do what thought says, which is meaningless, mechanical nonsense, even though thought tells me it's important. Either it's something very good is going to happen if you enact mechanical thoughts, the mechanical behavior, or something very, very bad is going to happen if you don't. So fear and greed is what manipulates us into jumping on board with thought. But it's all lies, because it's not that I am avoiding a bad thing or a catastrophe by doing what thought says, because when I do what thought says, that is the bad thing, that is the catastrophe. Or to look at it the other way, I might fondly imagine that a good thing is going to happen as a result of being a nice, obedient servant of thought, But it isn't, because that's the single worst thing that I could do. I've thrown away who I really am in return for what? Which is exactly the point behind the story about the pottage in the Bible, giving away your birthright for a mess of pottage. The pottage is kind of like just a kind of basic food stuff like lentils and stuff. So that's the same thing. So nothing good is going to come from giving away your birthright, which you could say is freedom, autonomy, for a mess of pottage. You're doing a deal with the devil, and so to do a deal with the devil and yet expect a great outcome from it that's not right. There's something wrong with my thinking there. No one ever comes away from a deal with the devil with a good result. The devil isn't called the devil for nothing. He's not a good Samaritan. He's there to trick and deceive you to the limit of his ability, to the limit of his supreme ability. He is the supreme deceiver, the supreme tricker. Now, I'm not suddenly turning this into a kind of religious thing. I'm not really talking about the devil, as in the Christian devil, because the Christian devil is just it's the same as the Christian God. Christian devil, Christian God is part of that story. Which, when I'm talking about the devil, I'm talking about thought. The devil is a metaphor. I'm not possessed by the devil, I'm possessed by thought. But we shouldn't relax about that, because thought is the devil. Thought is the very devil itself when it controls us. When we're in charge and we use thought for a useful, practical aim, and then we stop using thought again, we put it down, we turn it off, we put it back in the cupboard, that's fine. Thought is then our trusty servant. It's our tool. It's our faithful tool. That's the natural order of things. And thought becomes the boss. It defines reality for us. It defines us for us, and turns everything into mechanical nonsense. Meaningless. It's meaningless, mechanical nonsense, because it's not true. It's just our unreal thoughts creating a reality for us that isn't real, and creating an understanding of ourselves which isn't real. So this is absolutely our predicament. That we feel safe and comfortable in the state of heteronomy, and terrified by the experience of autonomy, which is where you suddenly step out of the paddling pool which comes up to your ankles, and then you're in deep, deep water. It's terrifying. So on the one hand, it's cozy and secure, and the other side, it's deeply terrifying and confounding and bewildering. What am I going to go for? And yet at the same time, that might seem like a no-brainer, because we think, well, I'll go for the comfort and the security, please. But it doesn't work out for us, because the comfort and the security is all based on a lie. It's based on a false misapprehension. Because actually, if we were to truly see it, the state of living, of handing over our autonomy to a machine and letting a machine, a robot, the inner robot, live our lives for us, is the worst fate there could ever possibly be. So no matter how scary reality might be, or how scary autonomy might be, in the sense that it's a risk because I don't know what to do next, I don't know what's going to happen next, I don't know who I am, I don't have any control, so that's all scary when we're addicted to control. It's still a hell of a lot better than the alternative, which is to allow ourselves to be possessed by something that isn't us, and something which has no human qualities. Thought does not have any human qualities. It's a machine, it's a mechanism, it's a set of rules. It can mimic being human. Thought's pretty good at mimicking human. What do I say now? Thought will tell you. How do I be now? What kind of things should I do in order to create a good impression so people will like me and not think I'm a loser? Thought will tell us. Thought tells us everything. So the idea of walking away from that and being in the world without thought telling us what the world is, and secondary to that, without thought telling us what to do in that world and how to achieve goals, and without thought telling us who the person is who's going to obtain these goals, is, as I was saying earlier, it's an example of Kierkegaard's dizzying freedom. That much freedom is just absolutely overwhelming. We haven't got a clue. If I'm used to being told by my thoughts what to do, how do I go it alone? And yet, the reality of it isn't insurmountably difficult or anything like that. It's just that we can't see how it could work. The mind has no maps of how living without a map could possibly work. Of course it doesn't. How can a map contain the possibility of no map? How can a map acknowledge in any way the worthwhileness or validity of something that isn't the map? So our thoughts will always tell us that this is impossible, it's unthinkable, how are we to do it? But when we do it, we find that we are able to do it without knowing how we're able to do it, without any template or any script telling us what to do. We find that we are able to be autonomous. We're actually able. And that's not surprising, because who we are is essentially autonomous, quintessentially autonomous and quintessentially free. So that's who we are. So it's not an insurmountable difficulty. It works very well indeed. Spontaneity works better than any mechanical approximation of it or simulation of it could ever work. It works perfectly well. But there is that leap of faith that is involved. A very big leap of faith. And a leap of faith is another way of saying that, well, we have to say, okay, thought tells me what I shouldn't do this. Thought tells me it's going to be terrible and bad things are going to happen. But not believing thought. Not believing precedents. Not believing the rules that have informed our lives up to this point. And then seeing what happens. So this is a jumping off thing. There's no know-how needed for jumping off. There's no procedures and methods and strategies that we can employ to do the correct type of jumping off the edge of the known. Because the strategies and the maneuvers and the methods, and they are the known. So you want to jump off the known with the known, and then you're not jumping off at all. So it's easy to jump off. Anyone can do it. But when we think about it, our thought will tell us no. Whatever you do, don't do that.